It was a Thursday morning like any other. The kind of morning that hums with routine. Sunlight glancing off the marble counter, my mug of coffee lukewarm and untouched beside the bills I hadn't opened yet. My slippers whispered across the tile as I moved about in autopilot, checking emails, scanning my planner, listening to the news without really hearing it. Then my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. No missed call. That was the first red flag. I pressed play, expecting something. Mundane. A reminder from my assistant. A courier delay. Instead, it was my mother. Her voice was clipped, formal. It sounded rehearsed, almost like she was reading from a prepared statement. You're no longer part of the family business, or the house inheritance. It's been decided. We wish you well. A pause, then a mechanical click. End of message. 27 seconds. My fingers went numb around the phone. I played it again, convinced I'd misheard something. Missed a word, misunderstood the tone. But it was exactly the same. Emotionless. Cold. No explanation. No warning. No fight. Just done. I stood there for a long time, staring out the window at the trimmed hedges I used to help prune when I was 12. The same yard where I once sold lemonade on Saturdays and came running in with scraped knees and mud-covered shoes, where my father would shake his head and laugh, telling me I'd never be the polished kind of girl. And still, I'd polished myself anyway. I'd pressed myself into their mold. I was their daughter, their heir, their fixer. Until suddenly I wasn't. I moved as if in a dream. Walked to my office in the house, a room that had once belonged to my grandfather, later renovated into a command center of sorts. Files, ledgers, partnership contracts, trust documents, all organized, all precise. All my work. I reached for the desk drawer and tapped my office keycard on the reader. Nothing. Red light. No beep. I tried again. Still nothing. I booted up the laptop. Locked. Access denied. I opened the browser, went to the company's website. My profile was gone. Not just removed, replaced. A fresh smiling face beneath the title I'd carried for 8 years. Vice President of Strategic Development. Gone, like it had never belonged to me. I clicked through more pages. The executive bios, board announcements, a revised equity chart. I wasn't just erased. I was surgically removed. Not even a scar left behind. Then I checked the memo logs. 1. Caught my eye. Board approval for strategic restructuring and reallocation of roles. Filed 5 days ago. Voted unanimously. Unanimously. That meant my brother. My unqualified, chronically late, charm-as-cover brother. The same one who nearly lost us a $3 million deal by forgetting a single zero. The same one who had once joked that I'd be the better CEO, but I've got the right parts for the job. I sat down slowly. My knees didn't give out, but something inside me folded. I wasn't shocked they betrayed me. I was shocked by how easy it was for them. My phone buzzed again. A message from my brother this time. It's for the best. Don't make this a thing. I didn't answer. I placed the phone face down on the table and let the silence spread around me like a fog. Thick, soundless, final. All I could think about were the things I had done that no one had ever seen. The calls I answered at 3 a.m., the negotiations I rescued, the $1 million errors I corrected without ever claiming the credit. I was the quiet one, the dependable one, the insurance policy they never paid for. I gave them everything. And in return, I got a voicemail. I glanced around the room. On the wall hung a framed blueprint of our original headquarters. My signature was on the corner. I had drawn the digital infrastructure plan by hand. A relic of a time I still thought I was earning something other than proximity to power. Love, maybe. But love in our family wasn't love. It was leverage. Be useful. Be silent. Be loyal. And still, none of it had been enough. I stood and walked through the hallway, stopping in front of the family photo gallery. The pictures had changed. Some were missing. The one of me standing between my parents at last year's shareholders' gala, gone. The one from my graduation, replaced by a landscape print. I reached up, touched the edge of the empty frame hook. Not even a shadow of me remained. They hadn't just taken away my title. They'd rewritten the story so that I had never existed in it. And what stunned me most wasn't the cruelty. It was how clean it all was. Quiet. Professional. Like filing away a document you no longer need. I returned to the kitchen and stared at the untouched coffee. It looked darker now, bitterer, as if it had absorbed the air around it. I picked up the phone once more, listened to the message again. You're no longer part of the family business or the house inheritance. It's been decided. We wish you well. I whispered the last part aloud. We wish you well. Like I was a distant cousin they were cutting from the Christmas card list. Like I was nothing. But I had been everything. And they'd only remember that when I was gone. I walked out, onto the patio, barefoot, the concrete cool beneath my feet. The wind was rising. Somewhere, a storm was gathering. I looked back at the house. This curated monument to status, where every room had once echoed with expectations I'd worked so hard to meet. And then I said the only thing I could. Understood. A word that held everything. The grief, the betrayal, the rage, and the seed of something else, too. A beginning. They thought they'd ended me with that voicemail, but what they really did was set me free. I was born into legacy. Not the kind gilded in warmth or old family quilts, but the kind engraved in letterhead and polished conference tables. Our family name had been embossed on stationery and etched into corporate brass for 3 generations. Even before I could spell my own name, I knew how to pronounce Valen and Comer like a vowel. My father used to say, "A good family keeps its house and business under the same roof." I grew up beneath that roof, a sprawling estate with glass walls and no privacy. There was a staff for everything, a rule for every hour, and a script for every interaction. From the beginning, I was the reliable one. I followed orders. I sat straight. I didn't spill juice on the velvet chairs or shout when I wanted to cry. My brother Jason was the wild one, the charmer. He once threw a rock through the guest house window and blamed it on a bird. My parents laughed. I apologized for not catching it in time. He was destined to lead. I was expected to support. He had coaches, tutors, mentors. I had silence, structure, and a schedule. At 10, I learned to staple board reports. At 12, I was in charge of dinner place cards for the quarterly investor gatherings. By 15, I could sit through a 4-hour budget meeting without blinking. I was praised for being mature, which meant invisible. The language of my childhood was laced with indirect lessons. Don't interrupt your brother. Let your father speak first. You're so dependable. You'd make a wonderful wife one day, so grounded. Grounded, like a tree planted in a garden not of its choosing. I internalized it all. Loyalty, after all, was the only currency I knew how to earn. At 22, I had the chance to leave. I had offers, real ones. A graduate scholarship in New York. An analyst position overseas. A man I loved who said, "You don't have to stay in their world. You could have your own." But I stayed. My father coughed at the mention of student loans. My mother raised a single eyebrow when she saw his name on a holiday card. "Too sensitive," she said of him. "He's not built for the life we live." I said no to the scholarship. No to the job. No to the man. Yes to the firm. Yes to the brand. Yes to the inheritance I thought I had to earn. At 25, I was running entire departments beneath titles that didn't reflect it. I worked late while Jason networked. He called me the numbers wizard, but always in a way that felt like a pat on the head. I didn't push back. I smiled. I worked harder. They told me to be proud, and I was, sort of, the kind of pride that's more like relief. I'd traded dreams for access. In the company of men, I learned to become a mirror, reflect their ideas, reflect their confidence, reflect back only what they wanted to see. At 29, the recession hit like a slow landslide. We were sinking, quietly. Partners withdrew. Clients panicked. Staff whispered, it was me, who negotiated the pivot into sustainability contracts, restructured our distribution model, and renegotiated vendor rates to save us millions. It was my plan, my strategy, my sleepless nights. The press release credited Jason. The firm called him the visionary behind our rebound, and I let them. Not because I was weak, but because I had convinced myself that playing the long game would pay off, that I'd earned equity in silence. Friends warned me. My closest friend Maya once asked me, "Why do you treat love like a prize you have to perform for?" My therapist, whom I only saw secretly, suggested that loyalty without reciprocation wasn't devotion. It was entrapment, but I defended them. They're just traditional, I said. They'll come around. I told myself that they had to love me, because I had shaped myself into everything they asked for. The perfect daughter, the model partner, the quiet storm behind every victory. I told myself that this was just what it meant to be part of a legacy family, that if I just waited long enough, I'd be chosen. I'd be seen. So I kept adjusting my spine to the shape of their silence. I kept saying yes when I wanted to say no. I watched seasons change through boardroom windows, watched love grow dusty on the shelf of things I told myself I didn't need. And little by little, I lost the sound of my own voice. I began to forget what I liked, what I wanted, what I believed. I traded curiosity for competency. I traded connection for compliance. And no one, not even me, noticed when the last piece of me disappeared beneath the weight of their expectations. Looking back now, I realize that what I thought was inheritance was only illusion. It wasn't an invitation. It was a leash. They didn't love me for who I was. They loved me for what I could give, how much I could bend, how silently I could disappear when the credits rolled. The hardest part wasn't losing the business. It was realizing I had given up so much of myself for a kind of love that had never truly existed. I believed my obedience was a seed that would one day bloom into belonging. But it wasn't a seed. It was a sacrifice. And now, the altar was empty. The morning after the voicemail, I still tried to dress like I mattered. A navy silk blouse, creased from too many wears but always flattering. A pair of pearl earrings my mother gave me when I first signed on as junior VP. I stared at myself, in the mirror, lips painted, spine straight, and thought, if I just show up, maybe they'll explain. Maybe there's been a mistake. The drive to the office felt surreal, like driving through a memory that had begun to decay at the edges. Buildings, blurred. My fingers trembled on the steering wheel. I kept hearing her voice. It's been decided. We wish you well. My mother, the woman who once told me I was born under the luckiest star. I parked in the usual spot, space EO3A, just beside the fountain. My name had once been painted in soft gold on the curb, but now it was gone, scrubbed clean. When I reached the front entrance and tapped my keycard, nothing happened. No click, no green light, just the dull red flash of rejection. I tried again. And again. The receptionist, new, young, trying not to look alarmed, peered over the counter. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was told. If you came..." Her voice trailed off. "If I came? What?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "That you're no longer authorized." She looked down quickly, the way someone does when they've seen someone get hit by a car. I stood there, the automatic doors shutting behind me as if to usher in a new era, one I wasn't part of. It wasn't until I made it to the elevator that I noticed my name wasn't on the directory. My title had vanished. I was a ghost haunting a building I once gave life to. I pressed the button for the 14th floor anyway. It lit, obediently. Machines, at least, had no loyalties. When the doors opened, I stepped into silence. My floor was abnormally quiet, like it was holding its breath. I walked past the hall I designed, the one with reclaimed wood panels and vertical gardens I fought to include during the Eco Initiative. I remembered how my father scoffed. Why add plants to a building? It's not a greenhouse. Now, the ferns drooped sadly, untended. My office door was open. Inside, the nameplate was gone. My desk was cleared. My photo, the one of me and my dog Milo at the company retreat, replaced by a blank stretch of wood. Then I saw the boardroom screen across the hall. A slideshow played silently. Meet our new executive visionaries. Jason's face filled the screen first, then a few new men I didn't recognize. And then, to my horror, a woman, young, blonde, styled to match the firm's aesthetic. She had my job title. I leaned in to read the caption. Under her leadership, the firm will evolve into the future. Under her leadership. I stumbled back, breath shallow. So that was it. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a rebranding. They hadn't just removed me. They had rewritten the narrative, sanitized it, replaced me with someone who wouldn't question, who would smile, nod, and not ask why her name wasn't on the patent for a system she built. I tried calling my father. Straight to voicemail. I called my mother. She texted instead, "Please don't make this harder than it is. It's better this way. We need unity, not conflict. Unity." As if I was the problem for asking why I'd been erased. Then came Jason's voice, his timing as theatrical as always. He called from a private number. "Well," he said casually, "I figured you'd come. And today." "Why?" My voice cracked. "Because you still think this is yours." There was a pause, thick with history. "You were holding us back," he said, voice sharpened now. Always correcting, always hesitating. "That isn't leadership. You're great with numbers, but this business needs more than math. It needs vision." "My vision saved us in 2020, I snapped. "And we thanked you for that," he replied, coolly. "But this isn't about the past. It's about growth. You didn't grow." The call ended before I could reply. I don't remember the elevator ride down. I just remember stepping into my car, numb, the parking garage echoing with my silence. By the time I got home, the world felt tilted. Every room in my house, gifted to me through the firm's housing trust, suddenly felt like a showroom staged. For a stranger, I went to the safe, entered the code. Click. Inside were the documents I'd filed over the years, papers I notarized without reading thoroughly, because I trusted them. Because who reads fine print in a family? I pulled them out, one by one, laid them across the table. Then I saw it, a revision to the family trust, made just months ago. My name wasn't listed as a beneficiary anymore. The house? Not in my name. My shares? Absorbed into a holding company. Jason's. I went cold. The realization didn't hit like a wave. It seeped into me, inch by inch, like ink in water. I had been working toward a future that didn't include me. I had been helping to build a legacy I was never meant to inherit. They hadn't just pushed me out. They'd orchestrated it. Slowly. Silently. strategically. I sat down in the hallway, the cool marble pressed against my legs as I curled inward, arms wrapping around my ribs like they were the only structure I had left. No tears. Not yet. Just the dry ache of total devastation. This wasn't grief for the business, or even the betrayal. It was grief for a self I couldn't find anymore. Had spent so long trying to earn love, to be chosen, that I'd forgotten who I was before them, before the boardrooms, before the compromise. In that moment, surrounded by documents with my name crossed out, I realized something brutal. They had never seen me. Not truly. I wasn't their daughter. I was a well-oiled asset, a function, a placeholder. My love, my labor, my loyalty. They'd turned them into tools. And once those tools had served their purpose, they discarded me. They weaponized my faith in them. And now, all I had left was a hollow house, a pile of papers, and the raw knowledge that I had been, erased from my own life. I didn't scream. I didn't write a letter. I didn't even pack with urgency. I simply left. 3 days after I found the trust papers, after I lay on the cold marble floor and counted every breath like it might be the last I could afford, I walked into my closet and chose clothes I hadn't worn since my 20s. Simple, unbranded, anonymous. Jeans that didn't announce wealth. A faded army green jacket that still smelled faintly of wood smoke from a long-forgotten bonfire. I left the pearls, the company laptop, the monogrammed leather bag my mother gave me when I officially became an executive. I didn't even take my favorite perfume. I didn't want to smell like my old life. The only thing I took was a worn leather notebook I used to doodle in during board meetings, when I was too careful to speak, but too angry to sit still. I turned off my phone, at a gas station, and mailed it to a P.O. box I'd never check. I paid for everything in cash. And by dusk, I was no longer in the city. I ended up 3 states away, in a town that looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. Nestled in a cradle of old pine trees and unpaved roads, it wasn't picturesque, but it was honest. I rented a cabin that smelled of cedar and neglect. The porch creaked. The kitchen faucet whined. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi. Just a fireplace that needed tending, and windows that overlooked nothing but woods, and I welcomed the nothing. I let it swallow me. The first few weeks passed like a fever dream. I slept at odd hours, cried without knowing why, stared at the ceiling for whole afternoons. Time softened. Pain didn't vanish. It warped. It became something I could walk beside, like a quiet stranger on a lonely road. I began hiking. Not far at first. Just enough to feel leaves crunch beneath my boots, to let sweat replace grief. Eventually, I found the town library. Small, 2 rooms, quiet as a breath. I volunteered to help shelve books. The librarian, a woman named Dot, who wore vintage cardigans and always smelled like peppermint tea, introduced me to the town's museum director, Marla. Marla was 72, sharp-eyed, and salt-haired, with a laugh that rose from her chest like a rebel yell. "You've got a good brain," she said the day we first sat in the archive room together, "but your eyes look like you left someone important behind." "I did," I replied. "Me." She didn't press. She just nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Under Marla's guidance, I worked part-time cataloging the history of a town that had survived fires, floods, and 2 factory closures. I recorded oral histories. I dusted off relics. I studied women whose names had never made the newspapers but had built homes, baked bread, wrote letters, and shaped lives. They had been invisible, too. I watched people from afar, couples arguing, gently over groceries, kids racing their bikes without helmets, women knitting on benches without urgency. And slowly, suspicion turned into curiosity. I began journaling again. At first just scraps of thoughts. What if my silence was never submission? What does power look like without permission? Who am I when no one's watching? One evening, after a long day of scanning documents and labeling artifacts, Marla poured us each a glass of boxed wine and lit a candle shaped like a badger. We sat in her kitchen, the window cracked open to let the summer in, and talked about what it meant to be a woman in business, what it meant to be useful until you weren't. Legacy's a funny thing, she said. Everyone wants to be remembered, but no one teaches you how to remember yourself. That night, something shifted. When I returned to the cabin, I dug out a box from the back of my car. It was the only personal thing I'd taken, half by accident. Inside were old sketches, notebooks from when I was in college, business ideas I never dared pitch, product concepts I drew in margins, biodegradable packaging, modular living pods, ergonomic furniture for neurodivergent users. I had shown them to my father once. He chuckled and said, "Cute, but we're not in the toy business." I hadn't looked at them since. But now, in the quiet glow of firelight, I saw them differently. Not as discarded ideas, but as seeds, unwatered, unclaimed, still alive. And I cried, not out of grief, but from the sudden, sharp awareness that I wasn't broken. I was unplanted. The ground they gave me was barren. But here, away from their roots, I could grow, maybe even bloom. It started with a sketch. No mission statement. No business plan. Just pencil against recycled paper, drawing a shape I had imagined years ago. A home curved like a shell, with space for breath and warmth, not just square footage and steel. Called it Haven. It had no roof yet, no permits, just an idea, a flicker, a rebellion in graphite. I hadn't realized it then, but I was building my way back to myself. The idea came from a sketch I'd made at 24, doodled during a board meeting about luxury condos. I'd whispered, "What about sustainable? Living? Affordable? But beautiful?" My brother had smirked. "That's cute, but we're selling dreams, not diaries." Now I wasn't selling anything. I was creating something I wished existed when I needed it most. A home built not from legacy, but liberation. At first, I worked in silence. Late nights at the cabin table, hands stained with ink and resolve. I watched online tutorials. I dusted off old design programs. I read grant databases like scripture. Then I launched a website. No photos of me, no name. Just a mission. Designing dignified, sustainable housing for women reclaiming their independence. I didn't expect traction, but slowly it came. Anonymous donations. A quiet email from a domestic violence counselor asking if she could refer clients. Then a professor offering research help. Then a civil engineer who'd once worked with my father but left after too many closed doors. I was building something. Not fast, not loud, but real. One cold morning, I stood in front of the town courthouse and filled out a legal form that felt heavier than any contract I'd ever signed. Name change request. I reclaimed my maiden name, not the branded family surname tied to press releases and corner offices, but the name before that. My grandmother's name, the one that didn't show up on stationery or business cards. It felt like closing a wound, like telling the world, I am not yours to edit anymore. Around that time, Marla gave me the number of a woman named Ingrid, a sharp, battle-hardened attorney, with a voice like velvet over steel. She wasn't cheap, but she wasn't afraid either. Over coffee in a diner that smelled like burnt sugar, I laid out everything. The voicemail, the contracts, the trusts. The amendments slipped into casual meetings under the guise of routine paperwork. Ingrid listened. She didn't blink. "Your signature's here," she said, pointing. "But their language changed after your approval." She traced a line with her pen. "They counted on you not reading it again." Then she looked up. "You were leveraged, but not erased." And that sentence lit something in me. Over the next 6 weeks, I documented everything. I opened old emails, retrieved archived files from cloud backups I'd forgotten existed. I pieced together a timeline of when the plan to remove me must have started, right after I'd proposed taking the company in a more ethical direction. I began to understand. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was an operation. And like all operations, it left fingerprints. I was no longer just surviving. I was gathering power. The more I acted, the more I began to feel something I hadn't in years. Momentum. Not the kind I used to fake at family fundraisers, where I smiled in gowns I didn't choose and toasted to futures I didn't want. This was quieter, earthier, like watching your own breath form in cold air and realizing you're alive. My story, though I never shared it, began to circulate. Whispers. In women-led business forums, mentions in podcasts about ethical entrepreneurship. Someone even messaged me on LinkedIn under my old account saying, "Heard what you're doing. About time someone from that family did something real." I deleted the account the next morning. I didn't need to watch their world anymore. And then came the letters. Not literal ones, though some women did send handwritten notes, full of aching sentences like, "You're building what I needed at 23. I didn't know I was allowed to dream of space that held me, not broke me. Most reached out digitally, quietly, carefully. Women from old money, women from no money, women with bruises that weren't on their bodies but in their voices. They told me about homes where they weren't allowed to lock doors, husbands who signed loans without them, fathers who said, "It's not your job to understand the business." I read every story, not as a savior, but as a sister. And the more I listened, the more I saw a pattern. Silence wasn't just personal. It was systemic, inherited, coded in manners and legacy, and guilt disguised as gratitude. We were raised to be grateful for cages lined with silk. Now I was building a door. Haven grew. I created prototypes, partnered with local craftspeople, crowdsourced designs, developed tiny homes with wide windows, safe rooms, hidden compartments for documents, solar panels that looked like art. I filed paperwork for a nonprofit branch, brought on volunteers, opened a micro-grant program, all of it in my name. Not my family's name, not the company's, just mine. Ingrid called one morning with a voice that smiled. "There's a clause," she said, "buried deep in a legacy amendment. Your grandfather wrote it before he passed, about equal representation of descendants in trust decisions. They bypassed it, illegally." My breath caught. "Can we use it?" She paused. "We can do more than that." That night, I stood under the stars outside the cabin. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't even thinking about justice. I was thinking about how, for the first time in my life, I was no longer reacting. I was choosing. I touched the wood, railing, rough beneath my fingertips. I thought about the women who'd written me, the homes I was helping to build. I didn't need to go back to burn anything down. I'd already lit something better. And soon, they would see the smoke. The envelope was cream-colored, thick as old money, and embossed with the family crest I once wore like a second skin. It arrived without warning, slipped through the narrow slot of my new life like a ghost. Inside, a single line. "You are cordially invited to the 50th anniversary gala of Fairchild and Fairchild." My name, conspicuously absent from the list of honored guests, made its omission feel louder than any shout. I held the invitation between my fingers for a long time, as though it might disintegrate or confess something if I stared hard enough, but it stayed silent, arrogant in its assumption that I would decline, that I wouldn't dare show up. That Saturday, I arrived not as a daughter or a discarded piece of family furniture, but as a woman entirely remade. The suit I wore was sharp, tailored, and unlike anything I would have been allowed to wear in their world. Midnight blue. No frills, nothing soft. Designed by me, stitched by hands I paid with my own funds. It hugged my shoulders like armor. As I stepped into the grand ballroom, voices faltered mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Eyes turned, and with them, the air shifted. My brother, flanked by executives and a woman I vaguely recognized, from some forgettable magazine spread, went pale. My mother's knuckles whitened as she clutched at her pearls. My father studied the floral arrangements with great intensity, his back hunched as though he could disappear into them. I didn't flinch. I smiled. The chandeliers sparkled as if nothing had changed, but everything had. The walls were the same. The music was the same. The branding was unchanged, but I wasn't. Waiters floated by with trays of champagne I didn't touch. I circled the room slowly, letting my presence settle into the cracks they thought they'd sealed shut. No tantrum, no spectacle, just presence. Unshakable, uninvited, undeniable. When the MC called for speeches, the expected faces made their appearances. My brother spoke first, all charm and hollow gratitude. My mother followed with a toast about tradition and legacy. Then, without warning, I stepped forward. There was no space for me on the program. No one offered me the mic, but I reached for it anyway. And the MC, bless him, or maybe fear him, stepped aside. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room was already straining to hear. 50 years is a long time, I began, my eyes scanning the room. Long enough to build an empire. Long enough to forget who helped lay its first stones. And sometimes, long enough to erase the names of those who made it strong. Silence. Even the band had stopped. Some of you may not know me. That's by design. My contributions were quiet, because quiet was demanded of me. I wasn't the face of this company. I was the calculator behind the curtain, the woman rewriting contracts at midnight, the one ensuring that the ship stayed afloat while others smiled on stage. I could see a few guests shifting, uncomfortable. And then one day, without warning, I was gone. Not thanked, not mourned, just deleted. A pause. A breath. No shaking hands. No tears. But here's the thing about deletion. It doesn't destroy. The original file, it just hides it. And I'm done hiding. I looked directly at my mother, then at my brother, and lastly, at my father, who was finally looking at me, face like stone. I've spent the last year building something better. Not out of spite. Out of truth. Out of freedom. Out of every piece of potential you called impractical. And I did it with no inheritance, no connections, no family name, just mine. I let the silence breathe. You don't have to clap. You don't even have to remember this. But I will. And I hope someday your daughters never have to choose between obedience and identity. I handed the mic back and walked off the stage. I didn't wait for applause, but it came anyway, soft at first, then louder. A woman I didn't know stood up, then another. Then someone in the back shouted my name. The press picked it up by morning. Headlines called it poetic. Some called it a scandal. I didn't read the articles. What mattered came the next day. Emails from women I'd never met, offering their stories, their support, their interest in my company. A wait list formed overnight. Partnerships, investors, all without asking me to shrink. Later that evening, I returned to the venue, now empty and echoing. I sat outside near the fountain where we once took family portraits now scrubbed clean of my face. I pulled the ring off my finger. The same gold band passed through generations. It felt heavy with history, yet hollow now. I placed it beside a half-full glass of untouched champagne. I didn't need bubbles to celebrate, and I didn't need that ring to belong. The moonlight danced across the stone path as I stood up and walked away. There was no final glance, only forward,